Oh, that's funny. Well, welcome to the Oxford Lodge. I've been looking forward to this for a while. This is actually not the first time Chad has been out here. His wife did a concert out here a year ago, and I did a small interview with him in the midst of that, kind of asking him what it was like to have your wife be a singer songwriter. But since then, he's published his own book, and we'll get into that later. Um, but the Oxford Lodge is designed to be a good place for students. And I say that we're here to help students socially, intellectually, spiritually, so that their collegiate experience can be as good as possible. The shorthand for that is it's summer camp at the campus. And summer camp's full of all kind of good things, and that's been my background. And I've seen students at their peak performance at summer camps, and I feel like a lot of the things that make that possible uh, need to be put into place at the college campus, and that's the idea behind the lodge. We are technically open 24/7. The key is on the ledge right out there, and I tell that to students who come, and people often say, "Well, doesn't that scare you?" And I say, I lived in the Sigma Newhouse for 3 years. That does not scare me at all, but it's amazing to see students steward this. You've been given something like this, and I hope that you, as well as anyone you know, you'll tell about the lodge and even consider supporting us, because this is how we stay alive, how we do what we do. And we've got goals. Our goal is to be at campus, near campus, and we're even looking at somewhere right now. But it's funny. Students have said, "Well, could we keep this also?" And it really, the Lord has provided an amazing way for this. So uh, tonight, though, we're here to do one of the things we love to do at the lodge. We promote reading. You'll notice there's lots of books all around here, and we try to promote things for students that will be good for them their whole lives, but not just for students. We also try to bring students into contact with adults as well, like you. And so um, Chad Holley is here. He just put out the book that you've seen, Shield the Joyous. And he's here to read a little bit from it for us tonight, and then we're going to have a little discussion. And the good thing is we haven't seen each other today, so it'll be a very fresh discussion. So the Lord bless our time together. Um, Before Chad reads, I just have kind of a comment and a question to make. Chad, my understanding is that you've told me you spent basically 19 years writing, rewriting, editing, re-editing, getting help, and then finally, this book was published. What is it like to? What does it feel like to have? And I should say that 19 years in part was because you had to earn a living. Chad is a lawyer, and he also teaches in a law school in Los Angeles. But what's it like to go through that process and see it come to fruition?
How long do we have? How long does it take? Wow. That is, that's just a question that sets me going. I really hardly know where to begin. But yeah, I'll just begin with confirming. Yeah. So the way I date things is I started this book, wrote the first draft of what became the first chapter the summer that my older son Jack turned a year old, and he just turned 20 this past summer. So that's the way I date these things. And yeah, I was going to law school during that time, and working on other book projects and pieces of writing as well. This wasn't the only thing, but this was the thing that all those years I felt like, of all the things I was working on, of all the things I had ever worked on, this was the one I had to see to some sort of end, or else I was going to be a deeply frustrated human being. and boy, I really had to rethink my timetable on when that end was going to get here, because many times along the way I thought, well, I think I'm getting close. And then, I was not close. And to have it out now is just unspeakably gratifying. It's it's just changed my relationship to the world in many ways. I mean, this thing, a lot of you who are creators that, whether you write or you create whatever, and you do it in your solitude, the place that it's really generated and the place that you that it keeps you alive. It's, that once you take it off of your desk, let's talk about writing for a second. When you move it off of your desk and start sharing it with the world, it becomes really real in a way that it wasn't before. Because other people are pointing at it too and going like, look, you wrote that, and you're like, yeah, I know, I've been staring at it for 19 years. But I'm glad you can confirm it. It's almost like asking somebody, am I seeing what I'm seeing over there? Or is it a hallucination? And they can go, no, yeah, that's really there. So it's changed my relationship to the world. It's changed my relationship to my work, just to have something out there that, that I made and that I believe in, and that it really represents my life's passion,
As you notice, the book is not very long, and there are no wasted words in it. Which is my highest compliment. Some of us here are part of a book group that's called, our title of our group is Omit Needless Words. That comes from Stephen King, which he does not know how to do that actually. But I thought if you're going to read, a good thing to read would be the beginning, because that way there are no spoilers really. And also the beginning is, like most of the book, is very touching. But so if you would read, we talked about reading from.
You also don't have to explain anything if you start reading from the beginning.
That's right.
No setup required.
But Chad's going to read a little bit, and then we'll talk a little bit more.
Okay, yeah. So the book is divided into 5 sections. I said no explaining. Here I go. The book's divided into 5 sections. The first section has a little title called God's Possum. Zeke Berry lived up the big hill at the back of the neighborhood, and for several years his mother had given me a ride to school of a morning. Zeke and I were in the same grade, his sister Wendy in the one ahead, and Mrs. Berry managed the tellers at the downtown bank. So at 10 minutes after 7, in all weathers, the Berry's long butter-colored Oldsmobile would pull up in our driveway under my basketball goal to sit and wait for me. None of our mothers were honkers. The morning sky seemed always to cast an impenetrable glare over the windshield as I walked out of our carport, around to my rear passenger door, to climb into the back seat beside Zeke. If Wendy never once, to my recollection, turned around from the front seat to speak to me, this felt more to do with modesty than rudeness. Of course, Zeke and I didn't speak, not at this hour, not in front of his mother and sister. Mrs. Berry alone spoke, with a polite half-turn of her shoulders, a distinctly bovine roll of her eyes toward the back seat. "Good morning, Michael." "Good morning," I said, and we were off. Only sometimes I would climb in beside Zeke to discover the passenger seat in front of me was empty. No head there, no shoulders, no luxuriant brown curls cascading down the seat back, and by the time I started 7th grade, I sorely resented the effect this had on the remainder of the ride, the energy it sucked out of it. What had Wendy Berry done to encourage me? Little, in fact, though she displayed none of the contempt one ought to expect from a pal's year-older sister. The only nip of flirting she had ever indulged me was an unforgettable chase through the activities building at First Baptist a year or so before. It was one of those spectacular pre-adolescent frenzies that involved long hallways, a couple of stairwells, and a gaggle of other kids. But rising to something in the occasion that surprised us both, I think, I had eyes and legs and lungs only for her, and in the manner of her flight, her flapping and shrieking, She made evident she'd noticed this and did not mind, which drove me on, against the burning in my legs and chest, the rattle of thickened saliva in my throat, until at last Wendy led us, alone, flying down the gallery that overlooked an indoor basketball court, where at the end of the passage, with but 2 strides between us, she went slamming, blam, through the girls' bathroom door. I braked instinctively. I had not seen this coming. For a moment I stood staring at myself in the push plate of perhaps the most sacred boundary I knew, scarcely able to imagine the country beyond. And before I had decided what I would do, my name came booming up through the building in a husky timbre I have never forgotten. Michael! And I looked down upon the basketball court to find Wendy Berry's father, a stout man with a graying cannonball for a head, sitting in a metal folding chair behind a spread-open newspaper, eyeing me sternly over the tops of his reading glasses. I will not say that but for this moment I would have made a different kind of citizen, but I do believe it gave me from early on a certain empathy with those against whom the shepherds of the earth practice all their vigilance. Less prospectively, I gazed at my feet on the carpet of the second-floor gallery of the activities building of First Baptist, appalled to the point of nausea at my clumsiness, my simple and utter circumscription. And turning without a word, I gave them that bathroom door. How I asked Wendy Berry to, capital G, go with me still embarrasses me. It is one of those things I have done, oh, that list, that I'd have liked to suppose was beneath me. But then 7th grade, junior high, had rather gone to my head, and one afternoon that first week, sitting in the tropical postprandial heat of an exceedingly gradual course in pre-algebra, I decided that when the bell rang I would get up from my desk, wade out amid the torrent of faces in the hallway, find Wendy Berry, and without the faintest warm-up to the subject, blurt, "Hey, baby, go with me." The salutation, the racy use of the imperative, they were without question. Back. Check. Hello? Oh, hey. All right. The salutation, the racy use of the imperative, they were without question the influence of Arthur Fonzarelli. Nevertheless, it was I who chose them, and when the bell had rung and I had drifted up alongside Wendy Berry in the hallway as planned, it was I who delivered them. The girl did not break stride, but gawked without reserve. "Oh, my gosh," she said. Upon which, in the crush, we were parted. Wendy still wore braces on her top and bottom teeth, but the rubber bands were gone, her complexion was clean, and she had big hair, meaning I understood she did not lack for suitors. Even a boy in the high school I'd heard had signaled some interest, notwithstanding this was one Greg Randolph, a cocky, rope-chain over turtleneck 10th grader who was overproud of his driver's license and a part-time job at the hospital that let him wear scrubs. Plus, I'd pretty well accomplished all I'd envisioned to this point. So, while being made to wait the rest of the school day for an answer was tedious, I did not begrudge it. And I was beatboxing in my bus line, the cream filling in a group that called ourselves the Oreos, when Wendy's best friend, the imperious head rifle of our marching band, whose imperious mother gave Zeke and Wendy a ride home in the afternoons, walked up and waited until she had my attention, which was not long. Wendy says, "Okay." Maybe a shade less affirmative than I had hoped for, but in fairness, there was no actual question pending, and in truth, I did not take it amiss. What perplexed me was what followed, namely, that despite complying with my best guess at what to do when a girl agrees to go with you by walking straight to her house after school, I could pry no further word from Wendy. She was down the Berries' long hallway in her bedroom with the door closed. I was in their living room watching a PG war movie on HBO with Zeke, who refused to make inquiries on my behalf. She ain't talking to me, he said, returning from his only attempt. Oh, watch how far he throws his hand grenade. Likely, I would have admitted being responsible for a certain vagueness in Wendy's and my new arrangement. I might even have admitted her coming out and joining me on the living room sofa was only going to present new and more urgent quandaries. But I couldn't take this anymore. These hushed, lamp-lit rooms, the chattering television, the ear-splitting aria of awkwardness, confusion, tension. I said, let's go outside.
Wow, that was even funnier than like that's the funniest it's ever been, and I've read it more than once.
Oh, I'm glad, yeah. I think that's the serious part of the book, actually.
Will you read the two epigraphs?
Yeah, sure. So, just a reminder, epitaph is what they write on the stone when you die. Epigraph is the thing you see at the front of and I'm looking at you like I'm telling you, I'm just reminding myself. It's because I get them confused. But there are two epigraphs to the book, and you can thank my editor that there aren't three, because that's what I wanted. But the first one is a quote from an amazing short story by the Argentine writer who's no longer alive, but Jorge Luis Borges. It's called The Garden of Forking Paths. It's a really kind of a mind bender of a story, and it's beautiful. It gets taught a lot in literature classes, but there's a line from it here. Centuries of centuries, and only in the present do things happen. Countless men in the air, on the face of the earth and the sea, and all that really is happening to me. And then there's a second epigraph from an Irish-English novelist and philosopher named Iris Murdoch. She was Dame Iris Murdoch before she died. And as I say, in addition to her novels, she wrote a fair amount of philosophy, and because that's what she was by training. And there's an essay of hers called "The Sublime and the Good," and here's a quotation from that essay. Art and morals, I'll read that again. Art and morals are one. Their essence is the same. The essence of both of them is love. Love is the perception of individuals. Love is the extremely difficult realization that something other than oneself is real. Rather fond of both of those. Hello. I don't know what is up with me in this. I'm not doing a good job holding this microphone. I think I keep turning it off by accident, so I apologize.
I don't know. It might be. It's medium technology. It's not low.
It works fine. It's just me. It's user error. I'm sorry.
Those two reminded me. One reminded me of Leo Tolstoy said, "Seize the moments of happiness, love and be loved. That is the only reality in the world. All else is folly. It is the one thing we are interested in here." And then from Ecclesiastes, there is nothing better for a man than he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God, for apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? And Tolstoy thought that history was not about great men and great women, but about all the little details of life that really go unheralded, and many of them unseen. And I say that because those two quotes seem to hint at some of those things, and I'm curious, why write a book that in many ways is a reflection on pretty mundane, simple things from a childhood that may or may not look a little bit like a childhood in Yazoo City, Mississippi?
Hmm. I think there's a fair amount. I think this is meant to be an answer to that question. We'll see. I think there's a fair amount of when you first start as a writer, finding out what it is you really care about, because writing is an extremely difficult. Writing well is very hard and to do, and you're highly conscious of how bad it is most of the time while you're doing it, right? And you're just like, oh man. So eventually you learn that life's too short to spend doing this about something that you don't really care about. I mean, it's just too. I don't have time to work on something that I'm just kind of lukewarm about. It has to be. So I guess what I'm trying to say is you learn to find out what you really care about, what really matters to you. And it's different from person to person. Other people can serve as your models to some extent, but this is a thing between you and God and your deepest self and your best efforts at self-noticing, and you begin to pay a lot of attention to what you really care about and what you don't. And those things that you care about, you just want to lavish your attention on them. And I remember there's a wonderful Toni Morrison quote somewhere that I came across a long time ago. I don't remember where it was, but she was talking about how, she's writing a novel and she knows she's supposed to be paying attention to the characters and all that stuff, but she gets distracted by the trees in her writing and she just wants to spend time with the trees. And I mean, I think all writers kind of know something about that. What is it you love? What is it you want to get exactly right? Because that's what makes it hard, is that good writing is all about getting it exactly right, not approximating it, but going at it again and again to try to say exactly the way it needs to be said. And only the things that really matter to you can you sustain that kind of attention on, I think. I don't know. That's my own theory. I know I hear myself pontificating up a storm up here, but you asked me. So
I'm going to hone that in more, though. But so that said, though, you chose to write a coming-of-age novel. You chose to write one of these novels that's it's about that time in life that we all know well, where you become more and more aware and have more and more questions. And it's a thing. I mean, I've often wondered, are the greatest novels simply coming of age novels? And you've written one for sure. Why that period of time?
This may sound kind of cliche in a way, but right now it feels like the best answer to that. I don't really feel like I chose it. I feel like it chose me. I mean, like I didn't really go like, well, I could write a coming of age novel, or I could do this detective story about where they, but no, that was never like a viable option to me. I wrote what I felt compelled to write, and what does that look like or feel like, feeling compelled? Well, I don't know. That's half the trick, is kind of being able to the extent there's a trick. It's about, I'll use that phrase again, self-noticing. I mean, it takes a fair amount of vigilance to notice when you're bored sometimes. I think we get bored in life all the time, and, we might live for years that way, being bored and not realize that we're bored. And I think being a writer, being a poet, and being any kind of creator, I think requires you to pay attention to what you're curious about, what is not boring to you, in a way that you don't really choose. It just speaks to you, and you don't even know why it speaks to you, and you don't have to defend it. It speaks to me. I don't know. I like that painting. Pull over on the side of the road. I just want to look out there at the woods for a minute. There's something about that just really, I know that sounds hokey, but yeah, it's kind of what I'm talking about. And at the writing table, it's the same way. So for me anyway, so I felt like it chose me. And I never really thought about it as a coming of age story till fairly late in the process. It just felt like a story. But you can't help, you've read coming of age stories, so knowing something about the form shapes your own thinking as you go back, and you're constantly asking yourself, well, what is this thing I'm making? What is this? I don't even know what this is. And your discernment of what it is surely informed by other coming of age stories. I mean, I knew fairly early on, I think I could have said it was not a detective story. Although I will say there's, it's a bit of a mystery. But yeah, I hope I kind of answered your question.
You kind of answered.
You can ask it again. I just didn't set out to write a coming of age story because something about them appealed to me. I just worked on it, and this is what came out because this is what I realized I cared about.
One of the reasons I wanted you to do this was because I think it's fascinating and helpful and can be very encouraging to people no matter where they are in life to hear the story of someone like you. You grew up in Yazoo City, Mississippi. You went to Mississippi State University. And it was always funny to me that you went to Mississippi State because the first time I met you, I knew immediately that you were a word guy. Because shortly thereafter, Chad came up to me at camp one summer and he said, "You quoted C.S. Lewis. Do you know where that quote came from?" And we're both, we're young, and meaning in college. And I said, "I think I do. Let me go make sure." And I went and got it and said, "Here's where it's from." And you said, "That's what I like, a man who can put his hands on his sources." And I thought, what a nerd, and how is this guy at Mississippi State? And you went from Mississippi State then, and pick up from there and kind of tell your story a bit, because a lot of people who want to do certain things, for the most part, you don't get to do the things you really, really want to do for a living.
Yeah,
And so
most people don't. Yeah.
You're an illustration of what it means to kind of take, the long way and, the long obedience in the same direction and to stay the course for a long, long time. So explain kind of after Mississippi State, what happened?
Okay, well, so at Mississippi State, I was a fairly enthusiastic philosophy major. Philosophy is, I discovered that in college. I got to take a step back. You knew I would. I went to college. I went, as a pre-med major. That's what boys that were good at school where I came from did. You just did, pre-med.
Manchester Academy.
Yeah, right, exactly. So you go there and you just say, I'm going to major in pre-med, and everybody leaves you alone. And I had in my very first year an introduction to philosophy class as part of a gen ed requirement. I went in there and I think at least by the second class, I'm sure my mouth was just open, like just sitting there, listen to this. I could not believe that people got in a room and did this in an organized fashion as like a collective human pursuit. Like philosophy. I was like, I thought I was the only one walking around in Yazoo City wondering like, well, how long is eternity or whatever, or whatever. But you get in there and so I followed my philosophy professor back to his office on the second meeting, I think, of class and said, "Is this a major? Can you do this?" And he's like, "Oh, well, yeah, sure." I was like, "Well, what do people tell their parents?" And he said, well, I've heard, he goes, they usually tell him it's a pre-law degree. I said, good enough. I'm sold. So I proceeded to be, for the next 3.5 years, a very enthusiastic philosophy major. I loved it. It just really spoke to me deeply. And my sense of wonder was just in overdrive. And that professor that I'm talking about, I'm still in touch with him. He's a wonderful man and sort of a mentor to me, Dr. Wallace Murphy, who retired to Alabama. But by the end of my undergraduate years, I realized that I was also very interested in philosophy as it is practiced, if I can call it that, by poets and by artists and by fiction writers, um, because they are very much engaged in some of the ultimate questions that, quote unquote, official philosophers are engaged in. They're just going at it in a different kind of way. And I was very, that way just began to really speak to my curiosity as well. I happen to believe, my boys probably sick of hearing me say this, but for me, curiosity is a holy thing. I've lived by that for a long time, and if I crash and burn, you can blame the fact that I believed in that for a long time. But by the end of college, I was really very deeply curious about writing poetry and writing stories, and so I took a creative writing class. And so when I left I loved it. So I was on this sort of trajectory of studying, going to grad school in philosophy. So I taught high school for a year in my hometown while I applied to grad schools in philosophy. And I applied to a program where a pretty famous novelist, a guy who was a philosopher and a novelist, William Gass, was teaching. And I did that for a year in St. Louis at WashU and realized academic philosophy is maybe not for me. What I really want to be is a writer. And so I left there. Claire and I got married, and that summer of '95, as I left the program, we had a series of house sitting gigs that first summer because we had nowhere to live. You can blame my curiosity for that too, probably. I'm just like, where can we live? That's interesting. And we ended up needing to go somewhere, and we pulled out a Rand McNally map and started going page to page, and we got to North Carolina, and I go, oh, I heard Chapel Hill's kind of a cool place. And she said, me too. I said, you want to move there? She said, yeah, let's do. So we packed everything up. We moved to North Carolina, and I worked odd jobs and started trying to teach myself how to write. I would go to the library on campus at UNC Chapel Hill, Davis Library, and find a carrel somewhere and just every day go at it. And I finally got myself a story together and sent down the road to a creative writing program in Greensboro, North Carolina. So I did an MFA then in the late 90s in Greensboro, North Carolina. And just at UNC Greensboro, yeah. And had a wonderful experience there. It was very confirming in a lot of ways. I just thought, these are my people. Really, for one of the first times in my life, well, not the first time, but for one of those times in my life, I thought, ooh, I'm actually right where I need to be. These are my people, and I like waking up in this town every day, and what I'm doing is dedicating myself to trying to figure out how to write and getting feedback on that and helping other people. So I'm trying to figure out how to abridge this because we're only in Greensboro, and I'm not even 30 years old in this story. But eventually, working on fiction and poetry and starting to publish that and starting to write a novel, I ended up teaching at UNC Greensboro for a couple of years. We bounced down into Mississippi and house sat, squatted for a couple of years while I worked on a novel, not this novel, a different one. And eventually, we, in 2003, went to Los Angeles. Claire, as most of you know, my wife's a singer-songwriter, musician, and so it made sense for her to do that and for me to do some writing. And we got out there, and, it made sense. I was telling Chad and Patrick a minute ago that it made a lot of sense at the time. I mean, we had no children. We were just the two of us. She was a, artist. We were just a pair of starving artists with a little bit of money in the bank, not much, not near enough to be going to LA probably. But we realized within probably a month or 6 weeks of moving there that Claire was pregnant with Jack, whom I've already mentioned. So I was doing a little screenwriting work. That was part of the reason for moving out there. I was just desperate to figure out how to do this and make a living. And I thought, well, screenwriting might be, a way to, made sense on paper, But we got out there, and turns out, nobody wanted to buy my soul. I don't know what was up with that. I was offering it on every street corner, and nobody wanted to buy it. So I went to law school. Yeah, and why? Because I was pre-law. Because I was a philosophy major, baby. I was making good on what I told my parents. Thank you very much. I am not going to be a liar. So I went to law school, and not because I, wanted to be a lawyer, which would have been probably a lot better reason to go, but just because I felt like that was some kind of life raft or some kind of conveyor belt I could get on that would help me to make a living, and because that was pretty desperate to do that. But never, ever, ever did I conceive of it as an alternative to writing. It was always a way to support it. It was, and I continued to write all through law school, and I got stories about that. But then after getting out of law school, you only have so much bandwidth, though, right? And we had an infant at home, and I'm full time in law school, but every day before going to class, before I would write a little bit on a project that I cared about, and I still have that screenplay too, if anybody's interested. But then out of law school, I clerked for a federal judge out in L.A. and realized, ooh, I like working for judges. I like working for courts because you write. That's what you do. You read and you write. I'm not on the phone with people. I'm not sending people cease and desist letters. I'm not doing any of the things that real lawyers do. I'm helping judges figure out who wins and who loses. That's kind of fun. It's a lot of work, and they get, upset a lot of times, and there's some stress involved at times, but it was a good fit for me. So I basically spent my legal career doing some form of that. About 15 years of working for the federal district court out in Los Angeles, and then almost a decade working for one of the justices on the California Court of Appeal, writing opinions in cases. Wonderful job and wonderful boss, who's very supportive of my writing, because at some point I let him in on the secret that this is not what I want to do forever. And to his everlasting credit, he has been nothing but supportive all along, and continues to be, because I eventually retired from that. I say retired because it was a state government job, and you check the box for retire when you leave, whatever. So, and I wanted to teach more. I've always enjoyed teaching, and as a day job, I think teaching is a good fit for me, or has been. And so I wanted to teach law, and that's what I do right now as a day job. I teach law and work on my own writing. It gives me more flexibility to do that in terms of time. I get longer chunks of time to work on something, because, when I was keeping a job where I had to go into an office every day, it was very frustrating, because it was nickel and dime kind of, like I'd steal 10 minutes, I'd steal 15 minutes, I'd steal whatever I had to steal, because if I didn't do it, I just knew that's who I am. That's what I do. Maybe the whole rest of the world doesn't know it, but I know it. And God bless Claire, my wife. She certainly knew it and supported me in it. And the really deeply moving thing in my adult life lately is to realize that my sons knew it. We have two sons, Jack, and I've talked about it, and Nate. And they became my biggest cheerleaders. And I'll choke up if I start talking about that. But they, Papa, are you sending that story out? Are you still, Papa, did you work? I don't know, man. It's just, you can't do this sort of thing, or really anything like that valuable and challenging, without people in your life who are walking it with you and propping you up when you kind of feeling like you don't know how you can keep going. And they have definitely been that. So, and then I'll just end this long story with this, but you did ask a very narrative question, as they say. Calls for a narrative objection. At a certain point, my friend Edmund Miller, who is my publisher, Edmund and I have known each other since he started following Claire's music in the Chapel Hill area in the mid '90s, and Ed is a book guy from way back. He's been in the book business in various ways over the years and publishing some books. He's a rare book dealer. He's helped edit like William Styron's letters and Truman Capote's letters. I mean, like he's always had an oar in the water with all that, and it was always a point of connection between the two of us, Edmund and me. And a little over a year ago or something like that, I guess, a year and a half ago or something, he said, "How would you feel if I published your book?" This was on the telephone. And I said, "I would feel very good about that." And that, so that became this joint venture. Edmund was really sort of wanting to, his press, Bull City Books, which is my publisher, he was really looking to make it a more of a venture. Did you lose me? Yeah, there we go. And, so we were both, really coming at this from a love of the game kind of perspective, but also wanting to reach as many people as we could with it and sell the book and, and possibly do more. And it's been a fantastic experience. It hasn't been disappointing in any way. I mean, Edmund has been wonderful to work with, very supportive. It's just enhanced the whole experience, frankly. And
the book's only been out how long?
Oh, what's today?
Has it been out a month?
It hadn't been out a month yet. No.
Oh,
well, so almost. It is November 12th when it came out.
One thing Chad is not saying is that by Edmund publishing the book, which Edmund really is a well-known guy in the book world, but he doesn't have this huge publisher behind him that's putting his books in the airport bookstore and things like that. And so this is one of the ways, his book is getting out there. So Square Books is carrying the book.
And they're just found out said they're sold out at the moment, but they're going to be in touch with the publisher and get restocked. So go lean on it. Go in there like 2 or 3 times a day and go like, "Hey, you got Shield the Joyous in yet?" They'll love that.
All right, I want to read. We're going to have 2 more things, and then we'll bring it to a halt. But I love this. You deal with words. We live in an image-oriented culture, but you've chosen to use words to paint images. And I'm going to read you a stunning quote from your book. "Some of those crawdads were a winey red, and some a translucent exoskeletal gray, and some had beautifully colored pincer tips, black bright and red and yellow, like the beaks of tropical birds." And when I read that, I went back to crawling through drainage ditches and catching crawdads, but I'd never thought about comparing crawdads to the beaks of tropical birds. Do you remember writing that sentence?
It was very early. It was a long time ago. More or less. I mean, I remember making changes to it over the years to make it say more what I felt like it needed to say, So,
is it gratifying to hear a sentence like that?
Oh man, you wouldn't believe. I can't tell. I tell you what was gratifying. So Bill, when he was reading the book, texted me a photograph. I don't know if you know this about Bill Boyd, but he has the most amazing handwriting. And he had written that sentence on one of these little cards and took a picture of it and texted it to me. And immediately I thought, that's it, stationery. We need to sell, stationery with this. But that was incredibly gratifying when you texted me that photo and I saw somebody taking the time to write out a sentence of mine on a piece of paper, I was like, whoa, it is real. Yeah. So yes, it's deeply gratifying.
I mean, I told you this. Your book reminded me of a separate piece. It reminded me of, most of the great coming of age books I've read. I mean, even something like The Yearling, which is some of the best writing I've ever read. But one more quote, and then I've got one more question for you. And I have to read with my reading. Will's room was alive with moonlight and shadows, and I had that weird feeling I often do, that something commandingly sublime and venturesome is in the air, that the world is issuing a call that must be answered, and here is the essence of the thing: only the immoderate deed will do. Is that autobiographical?
Oh yeah, I feel that way. Y'all know you feel that way. I mean, sometimes the world is that you feel so ecstatic and alive and you can't believe it. You just want to, like, I don't know, just tear off your clothes and go running through a meadow somewhere or something. You can't stand it, and it wouldn't do to just like go, I think I'm going to shuck my shoes and go running across the meadow. No, you got to do something dramatic. You got to, well, I got better slow down. Here I go. Yeah, no, I mean, I feel that way a lot. I think a lot of us do. I mean, don't you ever feel that way?
Absolutely. Martha knows that.
Okay. So if I see you running naked through a meadow, I go, that's Bill's immoderate deed.
We've all done that at camp.
Yeah, right. It's a little kind of a weak example.
Yeah. There is a good bit of the book that's not just philosophical but theological, and it reflects kind of a journey you've taken spiritually. Is that part of what's going on in this book, is kind of wrestling with ultimate things, and including like your faith as a Christian?
Oh, for sure. That's definitely in there. And I mean, the thing that happens when you work on a book for 19 years, just tell you, you are not the person at the end of that process that you were at the beginning. And as you go back through this book again and again, and you're asking yourself, what does this mean? What is this adding up to? Am I telling the truth as best I can tell it? Is this still ringing true to me? Is this thing I was so enthusiastic about saying 12 years ago still worthy of that enthusiasm? It's a kind of distillation, but it also tracks your own spiritual development in a big way. And I think to my reading and to my eye, very distinct ways, the book tracks that in my own life. And I do think, I'm glad you got me to read the two epigraphs, because I think they're really in tension in this book. There's a kind of deep sense of solitude to the point of almost solipsism. Not everybody majored in philosophy. I know. Let me stop and say that. Okay. All right. Sorry about that. That was just this notion that it basically, here you go. It's all about me. It's all ultimately about me. How do I feel? How do I, and failing to exercise a kind of moral imagination that's required to just consider someone else's existence and that you're not a part of. Like it is so not about you. It is, and this is a very difficult thing to do, obviously, but that's what the second epigraph is very much talking about. Like love is the extremely difficult realization that something other than oneself is real. You are not just a projection of me. And how just impossible that seems at times. And there's a kind of exaggeration of that somewhat in the book. And I tried to have what actually, quote unquote, happens in the book kind of tracks this in a way. I don't want to say too much, but yeah, that's what's going. It's I couldn't write about anything bigger and not just like have it all fall apart. I tried to write the book about life short, and this is hard. So I'm going to make this about as big a thing as I can think of. I mean, it's just why write about something trivial? I mean, I know that sounds kind of self-righteous, but yeah, I decided early on everything that wants to come into this book is allowed if it can hold its ground there aesthetically and just continue to justify itself, then it can come in. Absolutely. So. Oh, well, thank you. Thank you.
It's a good thing to close on. On Thursday mornings, each Thursday morning at 7:30, I gather a group of junior guys, and we sit on that couch and around this table, and I cook for them first, and then we've been reading the early church fathers. So far, we've read nothing that was written after 550 A.D. And I told him, I just said, if you'll get up and do this, I'll give you some things to read and to consider that you'll still be reading and considering, when you're my age. And but your book reads like those kind of things. It is there are no needless words, and I would encourage y'all. It's a rare. I just was elated not just to have your book, but that I realized the more I read it, this is the kind of book, which was not surprising to me, but that not just can be reread, it has to be reread. It's too dense. And by dense, I mean there's just too much there. And that's why I kept writing little snippets and sending it, because I would go, oh, that's amazing. And then I'll just give y'all this. There's dialogue in this book between little boys that is so dadgum funny and spot on, and it just took me back. I feel like every single thing in the book I could identify with. So I want to encourage you that it is one of those books that will, I think it will encourage you. It'll also, reading is such a great thing because it slows us down and it allows us to be quiet. We have to be quiet in order to do it. And Chad, I appreciate you giving us, it's people writing things like this that give us the excuse to kind of get away a little bit physically and mentally, spiritually, and sit before God and do something valuable like consider the lilies, which is what you're doing in this. So the Lord bless you and Claire and your children, and thanks for spending a little time with us this evening. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, we'll take a couple of questions if you have any. I don't even know what time it is because I don't wear a watch anymore.
6:25.
Okay, so
One, no talking. Two,
amen.
I see you in your sky blue back then. Your Tar Heel blue.
this.
All right. Oh, okay.
The mechanics of writing, do you do an outline first? Do you do a conclusion first? Do you do an introduction first? How do you get started?
Well, it all depends on who you ask. I don't outline when it comes to fiction. I outline when I write screenplays, when I write things for scripts. I outline, but I definitely do not when I write fiction. And now there are plenty of fiction writers that do. We'll put one together. But Flannery O'Connor at some point said, like virtually everybody, and everybody should be, I'm a big fan of hers. And talking about writing in a letter of hers once, somebody had asked her, does she know what's going to happen before she starts the story? And then she's just sitting down and writing it and working up to what happened. And she's like, no way. If I knew what was going to happen, I'd be so bored that I'd go out and just feed the pea chickens. And I feel the same way. So no, I never outlined. But that said, I very consciously work in drafts. So I just get a draft down, and then I kind of sit back. And I'm also like the person who's E.M. Forster quoted as saying, before I know what I want to say, I have to see what I've said. I write it. I put it out there and get it down, and then I sit back and look at it and go like, what is this? What, sometimes I might even just start probably, I wouldn't be too surprised. I can't remember anymore, but I wouldn't be too surprised if some of my first writing on this was just having little boys or just voices talking to each other and just saying something I thought was kind of funny and poignant. And I'm like, well, who are these people? Who are these people talking to each other? They could be these two little boys who are talking to each other or whatever, So it's very much for me a process of discovery like that. That's how I get started. And I just do a zillion drafts. That's the way I do it. But, you do it however you can get it done, So I know lots of people that like to outline more and kind of know where it's going to go, and that works for them, but it just doesn't for me.
So you don't do, like, you might think of a set and then, like, populate the sets or something. Or you might think of one character and then populate the character.
Well, really not even that. For me, it's all very language driven. I don't just think of a setting in the abstract and then go, how do I describe that? For me, the whole thing begins to bloom in my imagination in words. And I find myself kind of fumbling for what the right words would be or whatever, I mean, it's when I'm writing something new, as opposed to revising something that I already have written over many times, but when I'm writing something brand new, I just know where I'm going to start, and I literally do not know where it's going. And I could go on for 3 pages about the trees in a Toni Morrison way, or somebody could step onto the page wielding a shotgun. I really have no idea. And I never end the day. Very often I end the morning of what I'm working on going like, man, I would have never, if you'd have asked me, where's this going? I would not have said it was going right here. So there's a sense of surprise. So yeah. Otherwise, maybe that just means I'm easily bored. I don't know what, but I have to work that way. Wow, so quiet. Kitchen full of people.
I think we'll draw it to a close here, but Chad's here. We're here. There's a fire outside. Yeah. There's food and wine outside,
and there are books out on the porch. You don't need to go to Square Books tonight. You can get it right here.
It really is a good gift, but to be purchased and signed, inscribed. So
happy to do it.
Yes. Thank y'all again for coming. The Lord bless you and keep you. And anyway, we'll have some things like this coming up in the spring. Peace.
Thank you all.